Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hello. How are you? I'm okay. Let's do a show. Okay, Monday, November 2nd, 2020. Day before the election. How you doing? It's time for yet another show, and this time a live one. How do you like that? We're back on the air live after a brief hiatus for some surgical procedures. So fun. Everyone should get sliced up like Swiss cheese 2-3 times a year, I think. Go for it. It's lots of fun. It's been a bit of an ordeal, but I think everything's going to be okay. Ready to roll, pardon me, with a pre-election show. We'll do our best to keep you on an even keel, but of course everybody's going to be a little nervous. That's just what Democrats do normally anyway. And in this case, of course, it's a little different. This guy is a little different from your normal presidents. Apparently, I mean, we're going to have to jump around an awful lot today. I'm sure Greg has some structure or some idea of structure for his report. Not me. No chance at doing that. Pocket is jammed full with about 200 things that I think we ought to make some mention of. I guess we'll start with, I don't know where to rank it in the order of importance, but as it turns out, I'm going to give a hat tip to our Twitter friend Buddha Protocol for coming up with the terminology here. The president maybe kind of appears to be, building a third ring of walls or fencing around the executive mansion that we call the White House in Washington, D.C. I don't know what he's got in mind, but apparently he has ordered the construction of an unscalable wall, and I don't think there is such a thing as an unscalable wall, although others pointed out the only kind of wall that you can build that's unscalable is one that you plan to shoot people who are trying to scale it. That's a possibility. Not sure exactly what they have in mind in terms of what they're building, but we know that at one point the president gave some thought to alligator moat around his border wall. So I suppose that's always a possibility. But Buddha Protocol putting a name to it and just saying what he's building here is a walled spider hole in which he plans to hide after the election. And I guess the militias or armed thugs that he plans to dispatch to the polls, his Fedayeen Donald, to defend his honor during the fall of Baghdad, I guess. And we'll see how long that lasts. And until we pull him from the spider hole and put him on trial. And I guess that's what we have to look forward to. And we should have guessed that the irony was too thick during the fall of Baghdad for us not to realize that this was coming to Washington, D.C. sometime soon. I thought it might take a little bit longer. I think I probably can admit that. All right. Many other interesting, worrisome stories, people to watch, things to see, court cases to root through. The president is, at the moment, I think, is denying that it will be his immediate strategy to, well, what has he denied? I think he has said that he was planning to go to the courts, but I think that, I don't know, somewhere along the line last night, it appeared that he was denying what was widely believed to be a part of his post-election strategy. But so we're not real sure. Axios, I think, is convinced that it's part of his strategy to simply he was denying that he would immediately declare victory regardless of what the results looked like, or possibly denying that he would immediately declare victory even if it looked like the early returns said things were falling in his favor, because day of election day in-person voting might be falling in his favor. However, no denial that he would be running to the courts almost immediately to fight against continuing the counting of any ballots past I guess, midnight on Election Day, although, his memory's not as good, of course, as he thinks it is. He's under the impression that we always know who the winner of the presidential election is that night. And even when we know that night, or what we would consider to be that night, we often don't know until after midnight. So I don't know, it's a fantasy world he lives in, and he thinks we all need to live in it. Meanwhile, the lawsuits are shaping up in serious fashion. I mean, they are actually being filed, and we do actually have to watch to see what's going to happen today, because it's not entirely certain that the judges before whom these cases will be brought will, follow the law and precedent and what's on the books, and they might suddenly become not originalists. You never know how they're going to interpret these things. Some of the more serious ones over the weekend. Let's see. Litigation in Wisconsin, litigation in Minnesota, litigation in Texas, Pennsylvania, still on hold, but I think we're up to date on what's happening in Pennsylvania, except for the fact that the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court in this case, reserves the right to reopen the whole case after the election, which you can only assume means that there are certain justices who would, in the face of what might otherwise be declared to be a Trump loss in the Electoral College, might decide, yes, well, Pennsylvania's result needs to be reversed, among others. In Texas, suit filed by the local Republicans to throw out some 100,000 plus, and the number keeps creeping up. I think it's over 127,000 now. Ballots that were cast in the drive-through COVID response, drive-through balloting procedure. As I understand it, you vote on the exact same equipment, except instead of standing up in a little voting booth inside of your local school, church, firehouse, or, the Subway sandwich shop. I don't know where else they vote in Texas. They simply let you drive in to a parking garage and hand you the machine and say, vote, and then hand it back to us. And lots of people said it was a terrific convenience. They were able to bring their kids. Kids were buckled up in the back seat and could even keep watching videos if they have a video player in the car, a nice modern luxury, and you could vote in peace and be on your way. So 100 and something thousand such ballots cast in Harris County, Texas, the Houston area. And Texas Republicans suing to throw the whole batch out. It's illegal on the same theory that Kavanaugh endorsed in his brief opinion with the I don't know, it was a Wisconsin. I think it was the Wisconsin case that he attached this to. The idea being that only the legislatures of the states can set the rules for how you will conduct an election, and if elections officials make the decision instead, like how many voting machines should we buy and where should we put them, which has always been in their hands, that would be unconstitutional all of a sudden. So we have a similar suit in Minnesota and, like I said, Wisconsin, elsewhere, and who knows where else. I guess they plan to spend the day in court on Tuesday and into Wednesday. And, well, today being Monday, let's just talk about normal things for just a second. Greg Dworkin is here. He might have you probably have some abnormal things on your plate as well. Right, Greg?
Well, I'm here to save your voice if I can.
Yeah, well, I'm going to need to rely on you for that. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
You can hear it already.
Well, I usually don't let you talk, so I feel especially obligated to do that today.
Yes, okay, excellent. I'll go clear my throat for an hour now.
I was thinking of going into a completely different line of business, based on what I'm seeing on Twitter. I thought maybe I would go into the desk business. We're going to build democratic desks for everybody to hide under. Oh. We'll have mini bars and, TVs and only get MSNBC. And you can hide under the desk until the election results are known. And we'll make it very comfortable for everybody.
All right. Is there a surface on the top to hit your head?
Well, it doesn't matter. You won't be up there.
Oh, well, because
You'll be under the desk hiding. Because,
brave people like me, I'll come out and hit my head.
There's just so much post-traumatic stress after 2016. I thought I would start with a couple of pieces to help with that. Okay? Yes. First of all, this is Michael Bosian, who's a partner at a Democratic polling firm with Margie O'Maro, who's appeared at some of our Netroots Nation's polling panels, if
Yes.
anybody remembers back that far.
No.
And he writes a piece here called "There's no such thing as a shy Trump voter" in the Washington Post. No, the president's supporters are not lying to pollsters in large numbers.
Okay.
And, he goes through why, but that's not important. The important thing is you don't have to pay attention to people like Robert Cahaly, founder of the Trafalgar Group, who's basically the new pollster on the block who skews the polls in favor of Trump because there are shy Trump voters, and who, in fact, was on Sean Hannity over the weekend explaining that, Biden will probably be winning Pennsylvania by 5 points. Or, excuse me, Trump will be winning Pennsylvania by 5 points until the Democrats come along and steal it. And by steal, he means what Joe Scarborough describes in baseball terms. Instead of stopping the game at the sixth inning, these dastardly Democrats want to play all nine. And so, there's a lot of that stuff out there. But things are looking actually pretty good. And perhaps one of the better columns I've seen is by a Democratic pollster named Matt McDermott. It happens to be in the Brussels Morning.
Brussels?
Yeah.
Real Brussels?
But he's writing from New York. He says, want to understand 2020? Look at 2008, not 2016. You know my TED Talk. This is not 2016. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
But really, what year is it? What year is it?
And he does a great job of laying out how Comey screwed us in 2016. He's not around this time, and so it's just different. But the other way it's different, of course, is to have all of this district-level polling, which shows that instead of things breaking for Trump late minute, things actually look very good for Biden, much better than 2016. And just to verify that, we had a very good Wall Street Journal NBC poll for Biden, which was plus 10 points. It came out on Sunday. And today, Mark Murray posts, our NBC Wall Street Journal pollsters went in Sunday and interviewed another 800 registered voters from the top 12 swing states. And then they combined them all. Okay. And those swing states happen to be Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Combined them all. Biden 51, Trump 46. And October 29th through 31st, in their full NBC Wall Street Journal poll, it was Biden 51, Trump 45. So there's no change. Yeah. And important context, in 2016, Trump won those states by a combined 2 points. So Trump was up 2 points, and now he's down 5. So that's a 7-point swing in Biden's direction, and that's pretty much the story of the entire election. That's where things stand. If you look at the individual districts, you get a little bit bigger swing, but if you look at the states, you get about that amount, a 7-point swing. And if you look at the national polls, you get about a 9-point swing.
All right. That's it. That's the whole thing?
That's,
we won.
So it's not 2016, and people can, what's the right word? You shouldn't relax.
No.
You shouldn't feel
even if you voted, don't
confident, because we're Democrats. We don't.
I don't want to tell you what to do.
You should feel comfortable. I like this iteration, this conceit that was described of all people by Mike Barnacle. Feel comfortable. You should feel comfortable in these polls and in these leads, and they probably mean what they say. To be sure, there's always a chance Trump could win. That's why we're selling those Democratic desks. Buy them while they're hot. But he's probably not. And Biden is probably going to be the next president. We'll probably know by tomorrow night.
That would be good. So, I mean, as far as the numbers go, in terms of who will receive the most votes, that you should feel comfortable about. The discomfort, I think, is perhaps now growing out of, well, what if, what if
where?
What if he's crazy?
The place that the Republicans are set up to do this is Pennsylvania. But what if Biden wins Georgia and, he wins Arizona?
Set up to do it there.
Or he wins Florida, or he wins North Carolina, and so, Pennsylvania doesn't even matter.
Yes. Well, that would be one scenario. Of cour's now
it's not an unreasonable scenario. Dave Wasserman was on Morning Joe this morning and said, those are really the 4 states. Biden's ahead in Pennsylvania. He's got a 7-point lead in this morning's Monmouth poll. There are polls from Morning Consult that also put him up. and he was up 6 points, I think, in the New York Times Siena poll. Only the crappy polls that basically are trying to influence the election, like Trafalgar, have it closer than that. He's got a 6 or 7 point lead. Are the polls correct? Probably this year they are. Well, how will we know that? We'll know that in a day or so, so there's no guarantees. But, the states that Wasserman was pointing to are the mystery states. And it's true that all four can go for Biden. His guess was that Florida and Texas go for Trump based on past performance by a point. And we'll get into Florida in a minute because I'm not sure that's right. And Georgia goes for Biden and probably North Carolina too.
Well, that would be nice. That's
the state of the race, and that's what people are looking at. And then there's reasons, and we can go into those.
Then it would be great if we counted them. On top of that, that's the second part of it. That we usually leave that part out, but now we have to add that. We count them, and then it works.
Right. So in the pundit roundup, we have a number of pieces here, but Nate Cohen points out, for example, that Joe Biden's going today to Cleveland before he goes to Pennsylvania. And so he thinks Ohio's in play.
Good.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be going there. And that's like the Iowa stop on Friday, said Nate Cohen. This tells you everything you need to know about where the Biden team sees the race right now. It was a terrible poll for Democrats out of Iowa over the weekend, the Seltzer poll, which showed Trump up by 7 and with Joni Ernst with a decent lead, but actually nobody believes it. It's one of those, even good pollsters can have bad polls. And so that is a very close state. Again, that probably leans a little bit toward Trump. That's not a shock. You don't need Iowa to win the presidency. But so much is going on here with so many new voters that it's really unclear. The one state you can probably call already that was a questionable state, of course, is Nevada, and that's because most of their voting is already in.
A lot of states
and here's John Ralston this morning. Biden will win Nevada. Blue wave should help down ballot. It's not impossible for Donald Trump to win Nevada, but it'll be impossible for some Republicans in Nevada to regain face after they prostrated themselves for the president by actively trying to undermine faith in the election, or by remaining silent when they had a chance to speak out against such an insidious, destructive act. And I think that pretty much sums up where the entire electorate is at.
Okay, well then I'm in that. So I guess
he doesn't care about how Trump will win. He lays out the fact that they don't care about election integrity on the Republican side, and they're bereft of integrity. It's a pretty blistering piece, and I think he's absolutely right.
Okay, now what do I do? I mean, there's nothing.
Well, you vote and you wait for the results, so we're just talking until that happens.
Now I'm really bored.
There's plenty of room under the desk, though, so you can come in here with me. I got other articles, too.
A little dusty.
We have Garrett Graff. I remain amazed at how the GOP has stared down the nation's changing demographics, and rather than adjust its policies, double down on systemic voter suppression and intimidation. This should be the main topic of all political coverage for the next 48 hours. There's been a hefty amount of it, including trying to run that Biden-Harris bus off the road.
Yes.
In Texas, the
problematic.
Pepper spraying people on the way to the polls in North Carolina.
Don't want to do that.
The closing down of roads temporarily by thugs for Trump in the tri-state area, which is to say New Jersey and New York. And, really, if you're trying to persuade people to vote for you, nothing like closing down the roads and getting New Yorkers pissed off.
Yeah, they really enjoyed it.
It worked for Christie when he did the GW Bridge, if you remember.
Yeah, but you got to get the right choke points. Honestly, they closed down the wrong places. They weren't very smart about it. I mean, it's troublesome. You close down part of the Garden State Parkway, but apparently they closed down the express lanes and the local lanes just went around them. And
exactly.
You can get off
and then they did the bridge, the Mario Cuomo Bridge.
Yes.
What the hell is that? Oh, the Tappan Zee.
Yes, right. It's like Reagan Airport.
Yeah, something like that. Like the JFK Bridge. Oh, you mean the Triborough.
Yeah. Right, that one. Right. So you just take the other bridges.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what people do.
So,
it's a radio show
kind of
that
a
tells
futile,
you to go to a different bridge.
Both futile, F-E-U-D, futile,
Yes.
Expression of angst because they know they're losing.
Yes. Well, they're
so, again, you have to keep that in mind as we go into the election. Here's a piece from Josh Kraushaar, conservative columnist at the National Journal. Trump losing support where it hurts the most. The Republican Party struggled in the suburbs during Trump's presidency, but it's his recent slippage with white working-class voters that has Republicans alarmed. Data from the Pre-Election Cooperative Congressional Election Survey, CCES, a large sample political survey administered to more than 70,000 respondents between September 29th and October 27th, illustrates the precariousness of Trump's situation. The poll predictably finds Trump supports collapse with college-educated white voters. We know that. His 3-point deficit against Clinton's turned into a 22-point chasm against Biden. But the latest survey also finds smaller slippage among blue-collar white voters whose strong support for Trump allowed him to shock the political world. Trump won white voters without a college degree by 27 points in 2016, 61-34, and Trump's outperforming Biden, but only by 19 points, 57-38. So that's a big swing. It's still a sizable margin, but Trump can't afford any defections in the voters who made up the core of his support in 2016. That's how come he's always about his base and not about anything else. Dave Wasserman writes, we're at the point where there's more uncertainty about what the post-election period looks like than the election outcome itself.
Yes.
Though I'll never say the latter is certain until we see the results. But there's an excellent chance Trump is headed for the biggest repudiation of a first-term president since Jimmy Carter in 1980. You know, I talk about 1980 a lot. And an outside chance he's headed for the biggest since Herbert Hoover in 1932.
Yeah, that would be great. I don't know if he knows who Herbert Hoover is, but I do, and it would be fantastic.
Herbert Hoover here, everybody knows that, right? Now,
maybe not him.
McClatchy writes, Trump campaign sees a narrow path to victory in the final days, and they're talking about winning Nevada as part of it, and that's how you know they're full of it. They're not winning in Michigan. They're not winning in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania is a 5 or a 7, whereas Michigan and Wisconsin are 8s or 9s. So they need Michigan and Wisconsin to win. They're not getting it. Michigan is on the schedule for Trump to finish. I think he's going to finish in Grand Rapids. But, not happening. But they're losing them all. And that allows Biden to go to Ohio. It allows Harris to go to Texas and Georgia.
Yeah.
And Kyle Kondik points out prior to, this was yesterday morning, over the last 14 hours or so, we've got 11 polls in the key states and 4 respected pollsters. 9 were good for Biden, 2 were good for Trump. The Des Moines Register poll in Iowa I mentioned. ABC Washington Post had Trump up 2 points in Florida, but there's a slew of other polls that say otherwise, interestingly enough. And so we'll talk about Florida a little bit because Florida is turning out to be a really interesting situation. We knew it was going to be a key state. We knew they declare early. Armando's from Florida. There's a number of reasons why we like Florida. But
is that one?
That's one of them.
Okay.
If you look at the averages, the aggregate in 538 today, Biden's got a 2.4% lead, 48.9, 46.5. The latest poll was Morning Consult, 52-45, Biden up 6. Hard to believe he's up by 6, but that's what it says. We have Republican-leaning polls like Susquehanna have Trump up 1. Rasmussen has Biden up 1. Siena College had Biden up 3. St. Pete had Biden plus 1. Emerson had Biden plus 6. RMG Research, which leans Republican, had Biden up 4. Some place called Targo's Market Research. It's like George's poll. George.
Hello, I'm Targo. I think that, okay,
and then the CCES, the big poll that I talked about with 70,000 people, the CCES YouGov poll had Biden plus 2. So, a close race in Florida, no surprise. Everybody knows Florida's close. Our friends, you Michigan voter, and Eggy McEggerson on Twitter have been following this really closely and giving us numbers. And let me give you some interesting numbers here. From the early voting, nearly 9 million votes cast.
9 million votes cast. All right.
The Democrats have 39.2%. The Republicans have 38.0%. The non-party affiliates have 22.9%. And if you really want to make Florida simplistic, but probably true, is that each party has to get their base to turn out. The Democrats have a slight lead in registration. Republicans have a slight lead in historical turnout. So you basically have to get your bases to turn out and then win the unaffiliated. And that's how you win Florida. And it turns out that the Democrats did get their base to turn out. They matched the Republicans in early voting. Right. In 2016, they did so. And they had, I forget, something like a 96,000 lead with registrants. This year, it's going to be like 110,000, if not more, because there's still mail-in votes coming in. Okay.
Yes.
But the big thing is, if you look at the polling, and this is where polling comes in, the polling suggests that the non-affiliates are breaking to Biden by about 5 or 6 points. If that's true, then Biden will win Florida. If it's not true, then he won't. And that's really what it comes down to. And you can't look at the early vote and know what's going to happen there. But the Republicans did not continue to cut the lead in Florida right down to the last minute. In fact, in the last day, the Democrats increased their lead by about 10,000.
Oh, okay. So that's different from one of those other years.
Right, that's one thing. Another thing, so if you look at the vote by mail, the Democrats won that by about 662,000, and the in-person early vote, the Republicans won that by about 556,000. That's the reverse of what usually happens. Usually the Republicans mail it in and the Democrats show up. And that's important because the Democrats, including people of color, usually don't trust the mail and want to vote in person. If that turns out to be true on Election Day, and if it turns out to be true that instead of 40% of the vote that was left over from last time, this time we only have 20%. There's less of a red wave to happen. That's what we're looking for on Election Day, and that's why I'm mildly cautiously optimistic about Biden's chances in Florida.
Okay. And I'm sure
Florida stats after the break.
All right. Well, we'll save them for after. That's true. And maybe some of my voice as well. We'll see what's left of it after this quick 2-minute break. We'll be right back. And
maybe the whole election. This. You don't have something to drink.
Right. Let me get underneath. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Boy, now I'm very conscious of the my voice fading on me, which didn't feel like it was happening over the weekend, but Greg has tricked me into believing it. And his psychological tricks have worked on me.
Don't think about your voice. Think about that little black spot right in the middle of your forehead. Or don't think about that. Try not to think about that black spot.
Oh, my brain cloud.
See, now you're not thinking about your voice. Oh. So let me go over Florida to clarify. I misspoke. I'm looking at Mike McDonald's numbers here, and I don't think it came out the way I meant. In 2016, only 40% of Florida's vote was cast early.
40%.
We're probably looking somewhere around 75% of Florida's vote cast early.
What? Wait a minute. Now I'm lost. So,
in other words, Florida's almost doubled.
So it's
the raw vote here.
All right.
Which means there's that much less left at Election Day. And that's happening in a lot of states.
Yes.
So remember, the whole idea was there's going to be this blue mirage with a red wave on Election Day. But if you have a ton of vote come in, this much, even though the total number of people who vote in the election total when we're done might be upwards of 150, 160 million, probably 100 million has already voted.
Yeah.
There's only 60 million left. Only 60 million left.
Yes, well.
But, if 2/3 have already voted, only 1/3 is left. And in Florida, only 1/4 is left. So if you're looking for this huge turnout to bolster your side, you then have to go back and figure, and this is where you have to be a Florida expert, which I'm not, to try to figure out what all this means. You have to look at where the votes are from and whether these are your regular voters who have been cannibalized and won't be showing up on Election Day, or whether you've turned out new voters like the Democrats think. The Democrats always have a tougher time because they're trying to turn out people who don't normally vote. The statistics say that they have. But whether that's enough and whether that's true, we'll have to wait for Election Day. So it's not a prediction about what's happening in Florida. What I'm saying is the goal for the Democrats is to turn your base out, and turning the Democratic base out is more difficult than the Republican base, who tend to turn out. They're old retirees and they just always show up. You have to turn your base out and then hope to win the non-party affiliates. And the Democrats have done their job in turning their base out, even in Miami-Dade where people were worried. There's 1 million people that have voted in Miami-Dade already. They're not all Democrats.
All right.
There are Cuban Republicans, but Miami-Dade has turned out. So the Democrats have done their job. They've met their criteria to win. Now they just have to wait to actually see the votes counted and see how the NPA split. And at the same time, we have to see just how many people actually do show up on Election Day. We don't know that. And that'll be true for all the states, and that's why you can't use early votes to really tell what's going on.
Okay.
But Democrats are returning their ballots. They're getting their numbers up. They're showing up on early vote, but they're much more returning their ballots. And if Florida and if Nevada, the two states that are tracking this really closely, the third is North Carolina, if that's true everywhere, Democrats are going to have a good night tomorrow.
Well, all right. I'm looking forward to it. Just trying to think. I guess if what we say is true, in particular that communities of color are less trusting of use of the mail and prefer to show up to vote in person on Election Day. Although
Survey says that's what usually happens.
Though I assume some more of them have been taking advantage of showing up in person and voting early in person in some places. There's
some places,
that, thankfully.
Right? But we still have to wait and see what happens on Election Day itself.
I'm just curious, like the disparities, the usual disparities that we see in terms of allocation of resources might be exacerbated and look all the more ridiculous if there are long lines to wait in their precincts, which is usually the case. But there are even fewer people in the other precincts, and you still have 6 machines, and one person is showing up every hour because everybody else voted early. That's gonna, then we win the election and change things. That would be nice.
There's a lot of moving parts, So that's why it becomes so difficult.
They know
to predict.
What to expect. I think
we do know we haven't lost. The other thing that you have to keep in mind, just looking at it from a media perspective and how things are covered, is take Florida, which we just went through in detail. Mm-hmm. Okay, nobody knows nothing. We don't know who's going to win.
Right.
So people tend to fall back on, it's Florida, so it's always close, without looking at the numbers and without knowing why they say that. And it turns out it's true, but not for necessarily the reasons they think. It's for the reasons we just said. That being discussed, if you turn on your cable TV, which basically you shouldn't do all day, then you're going to have reporters saying, I spoke to Democratic operatives in Florida, and here's what they say. I spoke to Republican operatives in Florida. Here's what they say. And it sounds like the Republicans are a little bit more confident about Florida, and the Democrats think they can win, but they're just not sure. I heard that report, for example, from Casey Hunt this morning on MSNBC, and I said to myself, well, duh. You spoke to Republicans who always think they're going to win no matter what. You spoke to Democrats who never think they're going to win, even when they're ahead. And you got the impression from talking to the operatives that maybe the Republicans have a slight lead. They don't. They don't know squat. They're just telling you the way they normally tell you things so that it'll get on the air. It means nothing. Nobody knows who's going to win. And so that's why all the reports you get about how things are going are all basically garbage.
Oh, yeah, well.
Happens every year, and every year we have to remind people Republicans think they're going to win and Democrats aren't sure. Hello?
Yeah.
That's why
that would be a better
Democratic
answer.
desks.
What about that as an answer? When you get asked, you say, well, I don't know. So what I'll tell you is what we usually tell you, but you've already heard that before. So
right, and you know Florida's close, and you know that Republicans won Florida last time, and you know that I can sell you on the idea that you're just going to be disappointed again because that's what always happens, and that's got nothing to do with what's going on the ground.
Good report. I'll take it. I'll file that.
Take a look at the turnout rate, okay? And where is it going to be highest in Florida, a place like Florida? Sumner County, where the villages
Florida City.
where the retirees are, where the guys who, have time always vote because they're retired.
Take a golf car to the polling
But it turns
place.
out Broward which has a lot of young people and people of color, is turning out at the same rate as the villages.
Oh. Well,
That's
they don't
pretty
have a
darn
butterfly
good.
ballot,
What does it
do
mean?
they?
I don't know. I'll tell you on Wednesday,
I guess.
if
Right,
not
hopefully
Tuesday night.
The ballot is easy to figure out.
Just take these reports that you're going to hear, pretend they're early exit polls, and just ignore them. And by the way, while we're talking about that, let's talk a little bit about exit polls.
Okay.
We got a
I had
pandemic.
a
People
feeling
have voted
you were gonna do
early.
that.
Are there going to be exit polls this year? Yes,
Yes.
there are.
Okay, good. I guessed that one right.
They're going to be divided in three.
3. I did not
Yeah.
guess that.
Three. Three is a number. Three is
3.
more than 2, but less than 4. The way they do it
Yes.
is they're going to do their standard exit poll interview
Who'd you vote
if
for?
you vote in person on Election Day
All right.
with distance, right?
Who did you vote for?
CNN went into this
Like that.
in detail, right? With instead of the guy with the clipboard, standing next to you, they're going to be distanced. You're going to get a piece of paper. You're going to get your one-use pencil. You're going to be wearing your mask, and you're going to
Semaphore
fill out your
flags.
survey.
All right, and then fold it up into a
So
paper
those are the
airplane
people
and
on Election Day
seal
who
it
show
over.
up at the polls.
Right.
They've also been doing this for the early vote in person. So it's essentially the same thing as an Election Day poll. It's just that they've been doing it all along.
That's all right. That's sensible.
And then the third group
You would hope
are the
they would
people
do
who vote by mail, and they're using
do
a
you do with
traditional survey.
that?
And then they'll
Call
put
them on the
all of
phone?
those three pieces together, and that's your exit poll.
All right. Is
That'll
that
be
a phone
CNN,
poll?
ABC, CBS, and NBC. They're using Edison Research for this, and that's the story.
Okay.
When all of these pieces are combined, the exit
Good.
poll results presented on election night will reflect a complete picture of voters all across the country, they say.
But you're supposed to ignore them.
Well, you're supposed to ignore the early exit polls.
Oh.
You're supposed to look afterwards to see why did people vote the way they did, not how they're going to vote, why they voted the way they did.
Right. Yes, that's what it's good for.
Yep.
All right. Going up to Dixville Notch for that?
Yeah, you got to interview some people, and of course you got to go to West Virginia and interview some folks in diners there. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're doing takeout. I don't really know.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
well, no, they died.
is Texas really in play? Yes, it is. Is
Good.
Georgia really in play? Yes, it is. Is
Excellent.
Florida really in play? Absolutely. What about North Carolina? Sure. How are the Democrats going to win in North Carolina? You're going to have the younger voters, the not usual voters, and the no party affiliated, the NPAs, vote and break for you. Will they? We won't know that till Election Day. Texas is voting like nobody's business. More people have voted in Texas already than voted in the last election. And they're voting
Yes.
in the places that Democrats need to win. Is it enough to overcome the real difficulties thrown in their way in Texas and the large numbers of Republican voters? We don't know. You can look at the people
Lawsuits?
voting and say, well, by registration in Texas, Republicans have a great advantage. That's because everybody's a Republican in Texas. That doesn't mean anything. You can't look at that and really know what's going on. And all the experts who are looking at Texas are saying Texas is going to surprise you, so do not write Texas off. And, of course, the Biden campaign hadn't, and that's why Harris went down there.
All right.
Georgia, of the 4 states, apparently Democrats feel most comfortable about Georgia.
Really?
All the work Stacey Abrams put in, the people turning out, people being mad at Brian Kemp for trying to stop them from voting. That's happened in Texas, too, by the way, with Greg Abbott trying to stop them from voting. You do that, people turn out and say, you know what? Here's my answer. I'm
For
voting.
you. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see if they actually do it and whether they, use the votes and count them and add them up and everything, which is somewhat in doubt in places in Texas, but yeah, we'll see. That's one of the most egregious of the lawsuits I've seen filed so far, and hopefully the one with the least chance of actually prevailing, and it's been through the court system in Texas. It's just a question of, can we find a federal judge who was appointed by Trump who will say, there's no law, and see how long
they did
that
find one.
lasts. Yes.
One of the interesting things you
He's set
mentioned
to hear it
going
today.
to the parking garages
Yeah.
for one-stop voting and such, and that's one of the things being challenged. Those parking garages actually have these really large fans set up
do,
at
yes.
the voting booth in order to push the carbon monoxide out.
Right. Like, so you don't get mask poisoning.
Yeah, and who wanted that? The Republicans who negotiated and how to put the whole thing together.
Yeah.
That was
I
their
did
idea.
read that. You're right. That's how you
And
know
then they
were
turned
in on
around
it.
and said, no, it's a bad idea to have them at all. Well, wait a minute. We just worked with you to get the whole thing set up, and you even had input into it, and you helped to make it better, and now all of a sudden you don't want it? What's going on?
I say.
Well, Alan
yes.
West is the chair of the Republican Party in Texas. That's what's going on.
See also Affordable Care Act negotiation of.
Exactly. So, you have a lot of posturing here, but the bottom line is they don't want you to vote because they don't want to lose power. And so reasonableness is fine as long as we think we're winning. But once we think that we're not winning, we can't be reasonable.
Yeah. So that's the end of that. Yep. Right. That was, I did see that discussed. They pointed to the whole thing, the physical setup of the actual voting stations was negotiated fully with the Republican leadership of Texas. And I think the former, is it in Texas, at the former House Speaker there, a Republican,
Joe Strauss,
who says, this is a disgrace and an embarrassment that Republicans are seeking to throw these votes out. These people have cast their votes just the way we asked them to.
There are several
so
Republicans, in fact, in Texas who said that on the record.
Good. Well, that's something. And the Texas Supreme Court has been very disapproving of this whole idea.
Yeah, the conservative court said, well, this is crazy. I'm not going to even give you my opinion. I'm just telling you no.
Yeah. So that's a good place to start from.
Right. Now, when it goes federal, we don't know. We'll have to see what happens. Right. Meanwhile, this morning, Cook Political Report comes out with House changes, 8 changes, all toward Democrats. They think the Democrats are going to pick up between 8 and 15 seats in the House.
All right.
Probably take the Senate.
I'll take it.
Arkansas, AR, 02. Lean Republican goes to toss-up. New Jersey, 3. Lean Democrat goes to likely Democrat. New Jersey, 5. Likely Democrat to safe. New York, 18. Likely Democrat to safe. Pennsylvania, 17. Lean D to likely D. That's fine. But here's the ones I want to mention. Texas, 10 goes from lean R to toss-up. Texas, 24 goes from toss-up to lean D, probably will flip. And Texas 31 goes from likely R to lean R. Point being that all 3 Texas changes are in the Democrats' favor, and that's happening because of what's going on in Texas. It's one of those Buffalo Springfield songs, Something's happening here. It ain't exactly clear, but there's a whole lot of people voting. Okay. And nobody's really willing to say, okay, this is what's going to happen in Texas. I know exactly what's happening. They don't. Cool. Nobody knows nothing about Texas.
I'll say yeehaw to that officially. Texas 10 is Michael McCall's, currently his seat. What are the other numbers?
Texas 24.
24. Do you know offhand? I don't.
No.
All right, I thought I could check real quick. We got to look at Wikipedia for these things. Kenny Marchant in Texas 24.
It's going to flip. And Texas 31.
31.
Still Republican, but a little bit less Republican than it
was. John Carter, who I don't know very much about, but I'd be happy to give him a farewell party.
Is that where MJ Hager ran and lost?
31. I don't know. Let's see. Will it tell me very quickly in the last couple of elections? Not here. No. Oh, wait a minute. I'm further back. I got to scroll down. They should put the most recent one at the top. Yes, it is. John Carter defeating.
Yeah, I thought Carter sounded familiar.
In 50, very narrow margins. 50-48, more or less.
Okay, but the point is, MJ Hager had a difficult time winning last time, and even in what looks like to be a Democratic wave, Texas 31 is only going from likely to lean. So that was always a tough race for her to win. And for people who say, well, why are you running against John Cornyn statewide when you couldn't even win your own district? Well, that's a hard district to win.
Yes, that's true, too. And also, what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and let Cornyn run?
Yeah.
Someone's got to challenge him. And
John Ossoff didn't win. So. Why is he running statewide?
Yeah.
And now it's, oh, my gosh, John Ossoff is just brilliant. I don't know if you saw any of those clips that he had with his second debate before David Perdue turned chicken and ran out on his third debate. But he just took Perdue apart.
I did see one or two of them, nice dressings down, and I guess he didn't show up after that. Perdue.
Right. So remember, after John Ossoff, the guy's overrated. Why is he even thinking about running anything? And now it's, oh my gosh, he's the new face of the Democratic Party.
Oh, Well, that I didn't know, but
So these things happen, and it all
people have
depends.
to step
People
up.
like
You
a
should
winner,
appreciate it when people
and they don't
step
like a
up.
loser. And that just goes to my point that I made all along on the show for years. Stop telling me that, it's not good for Democrats to lead because everybody gets complacent. It's the opposite. Everybody likes to jump on the winner train.
One day we'll get used to that.
Yeah. So if you have a lead, say you have a lead.
Okay.
Walk proud. You're a Democrat.
Go ahead.
I know that
don't
that's a
have one.
contradictory thing to say.
Yeah, well,
That's like
win a few, maybe we'll.
That's like military intelligence. No. I mean, but you have. I know you're a Democrat, but walk proudly anyway. Pretend like you're going to win, like the Republicans always do.
Yeah, there's certainly people who think we should adopt that stance. I don't mind. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So let's
Cool.
just
Now we
scroll
know
through here and see if
who's
we have
where.
anything else that's really important here.
definitely.
I'm going to take a look here. We got other things in the pundit roundup.
Oh, look there then.
We have Molly Jong fast writing in Vogue. I'm still reeling from 2016. Am I now allowed to hope again? It's not just the Trump administration's mishandling of the pandemic that's so exhausting. The president's baseline nuttiness is just crushing. I'm so tired of the chaos. That word, remember chaos? We started using that word like the day after the election.
Right.
Every single day is a Saturday night massacre in Trump world. It's Watergate every single week. It's the Teapot Dome every 2 hours. I'm so tired of looking at my phone and finding out the president has done another insane thing. We're no longer Trump's constituents. We're his hostages. That's one of the reasons I think Joe Biden has a secret weapon, which is, as Obama put it over the weekend, if you vote for Joe and Kamala, you want to think about them every 2 minutes.
Yeah. That's basically it. Yeah. All right. Well, there's room for these pieces of, hey, how about them Mets? Aren't we all feeling this way? Yes, we are.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to some numbers. This is, again, Dave Wasserman rounding stuff up. Not sure we'll get more final national live interview polls, but here are my average crosstabs in situations where pollsters poll twice in October. October 2020 includes the first poll, and final poll includes the second. So, final 2016 polls. Final 2016 polls.
2016.
Overall, Democrat over Republican, 46-41. Okay. In June of 2020, however, the Democrats were winning by 12. In August by 9.
Including over 50s.
In September by 8.
Yeah.
Okay. In October by 11. And the finals by 10.
Okay. Ooh, it tightened.
It tightened from 11 to 10. What happened is that Trump had such a disastrous first debate.
Oh.
And I was looking at this in the aggregates this morning from 538, since nobody should use regular politics. They're crazy and they are arbitrary about what they do. But Biden had at the beginning of October had like a 7.5-point lead. And then Trump had this disastrous first debate.
He sucks.
Where he basically had roid rage.
Yeah, real roids.
Real roids, real rage. And he lost 2.5 points. And that bump for Biden after the debate has finally faded. And now he's like 8.5. So he's actually picked up a point over the last month. And when people say it's tightening, well, from where? Where is your arbitrary pick of a point to say that it's tightening? It's tightened since the first debate.
Yes.
When you're in the middle of that bump. But if you can look over the last month, actually Biden's gained a point. And as Wasserman just laid out, and just as I described to you, from June until now, he's been pretty steady. In August of 2020, Democrats had a 9-point lead. Now it's a 10-point lead. Where's the tightening? What if it doesn't tighten? We're running out of time.
When is he going to tighten tomorrow? Right. Tomorrow is the day he finally became president.
Yeah, exactly. White college degree in 2016, 50-38 Democrats, and now it's 57-39.
Okay.
White non-college was 30-59. Now it's 39-57. So the point is the Democrats have picked up in both those groups.
Yes.
All right.
And
the Hispanic vote, 61-23 in 2016, and there's a poll out from Telemundo saying it's really not that different. But in this telling by Dave Wasserman, looking at all the polls, 61-23 in 2016, and now it's 58-32.
Yeah.
So Trump has picked up some of the Hispanic vote. That's the more conservative Cubans and Latinos, Hispanics across the country who have more conservative views on social issues. Black vote 83.5 in 2016, and now it's 84.9. Not much tightening there. Now here's interesting: 18 34-year-olds who are showing up this year.
Yeah.
18 to 34-year-olds was 50-31 Democratic in 2016. It's now 60-31, 10-point improvement. And they're showing up this year as they didn't in 2016, but they did in 2018.
Yes.
Okay. And then the over 65s, 44-49 to Trump in 2016, 53-43 for Biden now. Huge difference. That's probably the difference. All the other groups are important, don't get me wrong. But there's just a lot of white seniors in this country. There just are, especially in places like Florida and Arizona,
Right.
Pennsylvania, an older state. And that change in the older vote is Biden's secret weapon. And who is it? It's people who just
telling
didn't
people
like
about
Hillary.
the secret. Yeah, well, that's a big change. And again, here too, the change that you pointed out earlier weeks, not only does it swing towards Biden, but it swings to over 50%, which is a key factor.
Yeah, women vote. Final
can't lose
2016
from that.
polls. And this is, of course, going to be helped by Lindsey Graham telling women that you have a fine place in America so long as you
Another weird
submit and keep your role.
Item. Okay.
And if you're black, you just have to, be conservative and do what we tell you.
Yeah, there's certain places you can still go in this state.
Final 2016 polls for women, 51-37 Democrat, final 2016. In 2020, that 51-37 turns into a 58-37. The point is Biden's made gains and inroads in each one of these demographics, except for the Hispanic vote. Important though that is, it's just not the large share, the lion's share. And the one group of Hispanic votes he has made inroads in is certainly Arizona, and we'll see how he does in Texas. Florida's a different issue, but of course Florida has a very complex, not a single group, but many group Hispanic vote there. So we'll see what happens. So when you look at the numbers, Biden's just doing so much better than 2016. This is not 2016. That's, all part of my TED Talk.
When were you going to get around to telling us it wasn't 2016? Jeez.
Oh, by the way, Trump's the incumbent this time. People are really unhappy with the pandemic, which is driving everything.
Yes, I heard about that thing. Yeah,
and he's mad you keep bringing it up.
Right, I know.
So Wasserman goes through these numbers and then says, the most striking is the stability of the race and Biden's lead. What if the polls don't tighten, is the way I like to put it. But a strange, fascinating twist, Biden's weakest point, September, was also his high point with non-whites. Since then, Trump has narrowed Biden's lead with black and Hispanic voters, even as Biden has stretched his lead overall. And maybe the latter trend is noise. Maybe it isn't. We'll see in a few days. Very hard for Anglos to poll Latinos and know what's going on. But two things that are impossible to call noise. Biden's made remarkable gains versus Clinton among 65-plus voters, especially in the final month. And we are headed for a historic gender canyon, not a gap, but a canyon.
Oh.
So older voters and women and, yes, white voters are going to help us.
All right. Cool. I thought you were talking about Kenyan, like did Kenyan college start doing polling? And
no, Kenyan like birth certificate, no.
Yeah. All right. Oh, right. Not that one either. Okay. Canyon. Got it. Canyon.
So it looks like the 538 polling prediction is 90-10. Biden wins 90 out of 100 times. Trump wins 10 times. Right. And they've changed their designation to Biden is clearly favored to win the election. If we're looking at The Economist, the way The Economist describes it, their model has 95% chance for Biden, 5%, not 10, but 5%, about 1 in 20.
Yes. Cool.
They figure Biden to win 345 electoral votes. And, it's pretty clear that Biden's the favorite, which, of course, we've been saying for months and months and months and months.
Yes, but that's because we have to, because that's what the numbers say.
Yeah, I mean, to be sure, it's not over till it's over. Right. To be sure, everybody needs to vote. And Trump can win, but Biden's probably going to win.
Yeah, well, I could win.
So relax. get yourself in a comfortable position. Don't feel confident. Be cautiously optimistic. But stay under that Democratic desk with plenty of snacks and watch the returns.
Yeah.
And don't watch cable news because they're going to try to make it a horse race, and it isn't.
Think about ways to get over unscalable fences.
Now, that's another thing. You know,
Oh.
to me, I heard that, and I didn't have the worst possible interpretation of that.
No?
No, I just figure that after the election, when Trump loses, everybody's going to be out in the street celebrating, and he just doesn't want to hear it.
That could be. But then
It's
he
just
could
as
get
simple as that. He
noise-canceling
hates,
headphones.
things like that. He avoids it. He only wants to hear people who are telling him he's going to win.
That could
And
be.
so if he could, he would make the White House, soundproof.
Yeah, I guess that was one interpretation of it. I just tell people that's part of my plans to place him under house arrest. This is a wall to keep him in.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you want to hang him, so you got to be really careful.
I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who do, and
Well,
many people
you're
are
just saying
it.
that, you're surprised nobody has,
Right, and that's the point.
which
Nobody
is not the
has.
same thing as saying we should.
That's absolutely true. My astonishment comes from the fact that I think people will ask us, why didn't we? And we'll say, I don't know. But the point is that we didn't, you see. Therefore, I can't be banned from the future.
Yeah.
Or
Is it
whatever social media intervenes in between there and now. I don't advocate it. I just say I think people in the future will find it surprising that we weren't angrier and didn't manifest that anger in stringing him up, which maybe we say good for us. Who knows?
So let me finish real quick with this prediction
You're so
from Henry
nice.
Olson, conservative. This is an easy one. Joe Biden's going to win comfortably.
Oh, that's short. Okay, good. That fit.
Well, it's
Very
longer than
well
that, but that's the important thing.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you distilled it down to its essence. That leaves us with another hour to fill, and me with no voice. But I think I can struggle through it. Lots of things happened. I appreciate your rounding up all the actual important ones, and I'll have the minutia coming up after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. All right. I think I'm going to have to lean into the microphone a little bit today and let the mic do the work of amplifying my somehow diminished voice. It sounds worse and worse to me every minute, but I hope it doesn't sound very much different to you. Thanks again to Greg Dworkin for staying for the hour, and we'll see him again on Wednesday, during which time we should be in the fraught vote counting stage, although who knows, maybe everything will have been called to Trump's satisfaction in terms of the reliability of the vote. He won't be satisfied with the results, of course, but hey, who knows? And we'll give a Presidential Medal of Freedom to Armando if he correctly predicts that the early announcement, or the ability of Florida to make an early announcement of results, will settle the whole thing. And, we'll have a nice ceremony and everything. Many, many things to round up and no way to get to them all. And I don't think I've finished even scrolling to the beginning of what I put away over the weekend without the extended weekend, without Thursday and Friday, even counting and all of this, just to share with you. There's so much. Let's see. I think I have kind of scrolled down to where we might have left off in the last, I don't know, maybe even after the Friday shows, Thursday and Friday pre-tape shows. And we might have left off about here. Let's see. We have in Pennsylvania, just to pick up where we left off here. I think we've pretty thoroughly explained what the situation is with Pennsylvania's lawsuits about voting. And I had put aside something in the New Yorker here by Eliza Griswold, who, let's see, do we have a description of, is she one of the columnists or is she a guest opinion type writer here? Contributing writer, at the New Yorker. But anyway, put together a piece on the Pennsylvania situation. In Pennsylvania, Republicans might only need to stall to win. A political analyst warned Harrisburg in 2020 could be Tallahassee in 2000. We know basically what that's about. And the idea that if they slow down the counting of the mail-in ballots long enough, then they can get past the agreed-upon grace period for ballots postmarked by Election Day to come in. But if they can slow down the counting long enough and Trump can say, look, I'm ahead in the day of voting and I've won some of these other states, you know the plan, for him to declare victory and then say it's too late to continue counting in Pennsylvania. And I think, now I think just we'll put that one out there because I think we've been over the Pennsylvania situation enough times. But I think an important clarifying piece that you might like to read if you're still not entirely clear on what happened there. The Minnesota case, did that happen? Did we get that in on Thursday and Friday? I have a TPM piece here from Tierney Sneed. Let's see, October 30th was Friday, right? So we probably didn't get this one on the air. But how a last-minute appeals court order has injected mass voter chaos into a swing state. We're talking about Minnesota here, and I made brief mention of it. We'll get you up to speed with their piece. A Thursday court order that indicated a U.S. appeals court was likely to reject ballots that arrived within Minnesota's post-election grace period has injected chaos and a potential for major disenfranchisement into a state that President Trump has long been trying to flip. Under a consent decree, this is an interesting case, this whole thing. Under a consent decree that Minnesota had reached in state court litigation, election officials would count ballots that were postmarked by Election Day as long as they arrived within the week after November 3rd. This, of course, a concession to the coronavirus and probably unspokenly to the slowdown of the United States Postal Service under Trump's orders, executed by Louis DeJoy. But essentially, there was an agreement between the parties and the appropriate elections authorities in the usual elections authorities in Minnesota that they would give ballots postmarked by Election Day a week to filter through the system and get to the elections offices and be counted. That message had been broadcast far and wide to voters, including in pamphlets they received with their mail ballots. The impact of that, of course, would be you get your mail-in ballot, and I don't know, for whatever reason you're pondering it for longer than you should. You're sitting there today saying, damn, I should have filled this thing out. Maybe I should consider going through the trouble of going to the polls live and in person, and maybe I should bring my absentee ballot with me so that when I get there, I can say I want to vote, and they say, but we mailed you an absentee ballot, and I say, well, I didn't use it. I want to vote here in person. Here's my ballot. It's unused. You can have it back. You can spoil it, etc. As it turns out, by the way, from state to state, things vary in terms of what you have to do if you change your mind. If you have filed the request for and gotten your absentee ballot and you change your mind because you're afraid that the mail system won't work in time, or like if you're still holding it, you know the mail-in system isn't going to work in time. Could you still deliver your ballot by hand? Yes, you could. And they may even ask you to do that if you show up at the actual polls and say, I want to invalidate this ballot. They say, why don't you just cast this one and give it to us? In some states, you can do that. You have to check, no matter what state you're in. You got to check because it varies from state to state, and it varies from year to year. Sometimes they change the law from state to state. In Minnesota, it is alleged by, people who live there, so I think they know what they're talking about. It's alleged that you don't necessarily actually have to produce your ballot. If you show up at the polls, it may very well be that the poll workers there might have materials and tools and resources available to them to know for certain whether you did or didn't send that absentee ballot, and so they can make the decision on the spot whether or not you should be able to cast a live in-person ballot. In other states, things lag a little bit. In Virginia, I understand the rule is that you're supposed to not only bring your ballot with you, but bring it with you unopened. Like you can't have opened it and then decided, screw it, I'll vote in person tomorrow. You can, And there are rules for dealing with that. It just becomes a little bit more complicated. I think their preferred method is bring us the unopened ballot. But some states are a little looser with things like that. And other, it varies. So check with your local authorities. I was thinking they should have people outside of the polling places in, wherever, any state, saying if you're here if you've got a mail-in ballot, if you got an absentee ballot and you're here because you changed your mind and you wanted to vote in person because you didn't trust the mail or you waited too long or whatever, be sure you have your ballot with you. If you don't have it, don't wait in line and then get to the front of the line and find out you don't have it. You need to go home. Go home and get it now. Bring it with you. Safe thing to do. Bring it with you always. I think that works as good advice in every state. Some states you'll need it, in which case, great, you brought it. Some states you won't need it, in which case, who cares? And I don't think that there are any states that will penalize you for having brought it when you don't have to. Well, you're just a brown noser. We're not going to let you vote. You're trying to be so technical. That's it. I think you're going to be safe everywhere. But anyway, in Minnesota, essentially there are people that they're worried could be holding on to these things and say, well, it's November 2nd right now. Tomorrow is election day. I will either, I read on this paper here, and there's Will Stansel, as a matter of fact, has tweeted a picture of what comes in the mail-in ballot package. And the instructions say, if it's postmarked on or before Election Day, it has a week to get there and it'll be counted. So you might say, well, I live, just down the street from the elections office. Now, if you do, go deliver the ballot. But you could also say, well, I think it's fair to rely on the Postal Service to bring it down the street within a week. I'll bring it to the post office. I'll get it postmarked tomorrow. I'll hand it in. I'll watch them postmark it. I should be safe according to these instructions on this pink sheet of paper that comes in the ballot package. I should be okay. So this is where the problem arises. The case is brought, I guess I could let Tierney Sneed kind of explain it. But if it doesn't come through, I think I understand the case well enough now to fix it. See, what happens is all these people are relying on this pink sheet of paper that says as long as you've got it postmarked by Election Day and it gets there within the week, you'll be okay. And now the judges in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals say, oh, something I should have told you. Actually, no. It's really the ballot has to be in the hands of elections officials on Election Day, just like an in-person ballot. There is no grace period. Yes, we mailed everybody in a state a pink sheet along with their ballot that said you had a week. And yes, it's only a couple days until the election. And yes, millions of people could be relying on the instructions that they got from the state agency that administers elections. And yes, you're not supposed to change the rules of an election too close to an election. And yes, we also believe that courts can't change election rules at all, and it has to be the legislature that does it. But here's the news. It's a couple days before the election. We're changing the rules, and it's going to be us, the courts, doing it, and what you read on your instruction sheet isn't true anymore. So that could cause a lot of chaos. It's problematic. As Tierney reports it here, the message, as I said, had been broadcast far and wide to voters, including in pamphlets they received with their mail ballots. But now, many of those ballots are in jeopardy after the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, citing an extremely controversial legal theory that has not been endorsed by a majority of the Supreme Court. This is the Kavanaugh opinion that we heard about from the Wisconsin case the other day, end of last week. Now, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals has ordered those ballots segregated from those that come in by Election Day. In other words, if you now have a mail-in ballot that you got postmarked by Election Day, November 3rd, but it arrives at the elections office on November 4th, they are to be kept in a different place, in a different lockbox, as it were, from all the other ballots, with the idea in mind that we might invalidate them, even though everybody was told that this was going to be okay. So that's weird. You don't want that. The appeals court made clear that it was likely to order those ballots rejected at a later stage in the judicial proceedings. Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon, who's a Democrat, said in a press conference on Thursday night, a press teleconference because COVID, that after the order came down, the state had not decided whether to now seek the Supreme Court's intervention. In the meantime, the Supreme Court might not be all that favorable to them, so they might want to hold off on that. I don't know. In the meantime, Minnesota elections officials and their partners are launching a desperate public messaging campaign, stressing to voters that despite the instructions that came with their ballots, it is now too late to use mail delivery to submit ballots. And I saw lots of messaging in the last couple of days of last week and over the weekend. Yeah, if you're still holding on to a ballot that you intended to mail, you cannot mail it. You must drop it off. But there's more to it, even than that. And I don't know whether we'll see how thorough the report is here. But I don't see it in my in my quick scan here. But if you're in Minnesota, first of all, good morning. And second of all, if you're still holding onto a ballot and you are planning to deliver it by hand to the elections office because you haven't mailed it yet and you don't think the mail system will get it there in time, it won't. You're right about that. When do you have to deliver it by? And guess what? The answer is not by the time the polls close at 8 p.m. or whatever, but 3 p.m. For some reason, hand delivery of these ballots has got to be by 3 p.m. on Election Day. If you mailed it already and it's too late and you can't climb into the mailbox and get it back out, the mail system has until 8 p.m. to deliver it. But if you're going to deliver it by hand, for some reason, it's 3 p.m. Now, the reason at first I was worried that the judges had come up with some kind of crazy arbitrary deadline. But no, it's actually by default, Minnesota law would have it that way. That if you're going to hand deliver your ballot, it's got to be in by 3 p.m. I don't know what the original intent was there and why 8 p.m. is okay for the mail, but hand delivery has to be earlier. But it is. And as crappy a ruling as I thought the Eighth Circuit handed down, they were doing just a plain text read. I mean, I don't think that's adequate to the situation, but they were doing what claimed to be a plain text reading of the Minnesota statutes. As it turns out, remember that all of this stems from a consent decree, which is, it's lingo, but it tips you off to the fact that that's not the way things usually work. In fact, the default Minnesota rule is ordinarily, absent a consent decree like this, because of COVID or whatever you want to blame it on, absent an agreement, the usual rule is that ballots have to be postmarked by Election Day and arrive by Election Day. Now, you probably aren't going to do both. You're not going to get both done, but who knows? You could get lucky. But usually they don't have this 1 week grace period. That was something that was agreed upon by the parties and the elections officials, which really the fact that they entered into a consent decree and that this was cleared by a court, that should stand in place of what the statute normally requires. The Republican lawsuit claims that you can't have a consent decree changing the rules of an election, that it's essentially not up to elections officials with the agreement of the two major parties to do that, but as the Constitution purports to require, that only a state's legislature can make such changes. That's the Kavanaugh theory, and they're endorsing it. And I mean, it's not like they're without a leg to stand on. Particularly if you're a non-lawyer, you'd read the thing and it says, well, the law says here in the state that it's got to be in by Election Day. That's not complicated. I understand that. It's crappy. They should change it, but that's what the law says. It only becomes complicated when you say, well, early on in the process, we got all the interested parties together, the courts, the two parties, the elections officials. We said COVID's a real thing. Let's make some accommodation. Does everybody agree? Yes. Let's write it all down. Yeah, we wrote it all down. Let's sign it. Yeah, let's give it to a court and say, court, what do you think? Can we do this? Court reviewed it, said, I see no problem with it. Go ahead and do it. Everybody agrees. So good. Unanimous consent. That's how it's going to work. And the Republican lawsuit is, who cares whose consent you get? The Constitution says it has to be the state's legislature. Now, the state's legislature did make those rules. The state's legislature also grants a good deal of autonomy to the elections officials to interpret the broad strokes rules that they set down. So, ballot design and the, everything, stuff like that, all, who's going to, the order on the ballot, how big will the ballot be, what sorts of machines will they buy for counting the votes, what color paper are we going to use when we want to send out a notice that says it has to get in here within a week because it's an unusual thing, so we'll put it on pink paper. That's all up to us. All of a sudden, none of that is up to them anymore, and the legislature has to decide what color paper it's on, and the legislature has to decide what kind of Scantron machines you'll use to fill in the oval ballots. That's never been the case. That's what makes the Kavanaugh theory so controversial. It's just never been like that before. And, of course, you'll note from the record here, I mean, at no point have I read you anything, and nor will you find anything anywhere, a situation in which the Minnesota legislature has said, wait a minute, only we get to decide that stuff. We object to the elections officials extending the deadline for a week. That's up to us. We know how to speak for ourselves. We reject this thing. We'll extend it for a week or refuse to extend it for a week. And we know how to do that. We vote on those things. We do those sorts of resolutions and bills all the time. But we decided not to. Over the entirety of this extended elections period, from mid-September on, we never said a word about objecting to the idea of expanding the grace period to people because everybody agreed to it. It made sense, and both parties agreed, and we entered it with the court. And they now say none of that matters. That's what the Eighth Circuit Court has to say about these things. It was pointed out to me, by the way, it's a 3-judge panel, as it always is on one of these appeals courts, unless they're sitting on banc. But 2 of the judges, one, of course, a Trump appointee, and one a Bush appointee, outvoting the, I can't remember whether it was Obama or Clinton appointee. So no surprise there. But somebody did point out that the Trump appointee, who was one of the 2 judges in the majority here, is one of the like half dozen judges appointed to the bench that were rated not qualified by the ABA. Interesting case, this guy. Apparently, most of the not qualified ratings went to people who hadn't practiced law for long enough or hadn't tried any cases as trial attorneys, things like that. This guy, I guess, had real trial experience, but he was simply rated not qualified purely on the basis of his demeanor. They just said he just doesn't have judicial temperament. We can't endorse him. Kind of interesting. Wasn't expecting that one, but apparently that's the case. So anyway, that's where the Minnesota case stands at the moment. I guess I could have read the rest of Tierney's write-up of it here. Let's see. There's what can we glean out of this that we still need? The order not only disrupted the voting plans of those who had not yet submitted their ballots, given that the Postal Service has advised voters that they give their ballots no fewer than 7 days to make it through the mail service. Voters who put their ballots in the mail earlier this week, when the extended deadline was still firmly in place, may also see their ballots in jeopardy. Those are the people I'm worried about. If you still have it, deliver it by hand by 3 p.m., please. Secretary of State Simon is encouraging those voters to monitor their ballots' delivery on the ballot tracking technology service the state offers. If it looks like the ballot will not arrive by Election Day, they should vote in person or request and submit in person another absentee ballot instead. You get it? You could request another absentee ballot, pick it up, fill it out right at the office, drop it off. Right there. The amount of confusion the court has thrown at voters just 5 days before the election, when they handed down their decision, is the exact scenario the U.S. Supreme Court has said federal courts should avoid, beginning with the 2006 order that put on hold a lower court decision that changed the rules of an election. The 2006 Supreme Court order, in the case called Purcell v. Gonzalez, discouraged federal courts from taking actions that themselves result in voter confusion and consequent incentive to remain away from the polls. It's hard to think of a decision that turns that guidance more on its head than the one that the Eighth Circuit handed down on Thursday evening, disrupting on October 29th, a policy that had been put in place in July, earlier even than September. State officials had agreed to the extensions, and the state's Democratic legislature has not challenged the move to do so. As part of the state court litigation, the Trump campaign agreed not to challenge the consent decree of the state officials, but two of the Trump electors sued in federal court to challenge the decree. Which, by the way, see, Armando would love this one. I'll get back to that in just a second. I guess I'll say this. I'm not so sure that I would have recognized standing for these guys. You see what happened here? The Trump campaign agreed not to file this suit, so they had to go out and get somebody else to file this suit. And they took two of the state's electors for Trump. If Trump were to win Minnesota, these guys would be part of the Electoral College. And they sued in federal court saying that it affected their ability to stand for election as electors in Minnesota. Which then you have to go through a whole calculus of, well, are these guys really running for office? They're not really. But then again, technically, all we are doing is electing electors to the Electoral College in each state. And yes, those electors correspond to one candidate or the other. But have we gotten past that? Are we really, well past the point where the majority of people in this country, even think about electors anymore? In some states, they actually list the names of the electors. Most states, they don't. I don't know what it's like in Minnesota. But there's a real question here. If you're talking about, well, if Trump wins Minnesota, which is a long shot, then I would be an elector. And if I were an elector, then I would have an impact on, electing the next president of the United States. But I won't have the chance to have that impact unless the outcome of this race changes. But this outcome should change because the rules were changed without involving a direct order from the legislature. And if the legislature if it had been forced to make that decision and then hadn't, then I might win because all these votes would be invalidated and I might become an elector. That's no basis for standing. In my view, I would have said, yeah, you haven't suffered an injury. Not yet, anyway. And you're not likely to either. So I don't think so. The people who have had their rights implicated here is the legislature. And if the legislature wants to sue and say, hey, this consent decree ought to be invalidated because I wasn't the party to it as the legislature. And the Constitution, as we all know, says that the state's legislature will determine the manner of holding these elections. And we didn't determine this. The parties and state elections officials determined this among themselves, and they didn't even ask us. We have standing to sue, but I don't want to sue because I like this consent decree. You don't like this consent decree, but you don't have a choice about suing. You haven't been injured. You didn't have the right to decide how this election would be conducted. You only have the right, if Trump wins that election, to be a part of the Electoral College, and your votes are bound anyway. You don't really have any free will in any of this. So I would have rejected the whole thing on standing grounds, which I think the one dissenting judge actually did. But, to hell with all of that. Standing is a doctrine that Republicans use to kick Democrats out of court when it looks like they're going to win, and it's something they ignore when it looks like Republicans might win the case. They're willing to overlook it. All right, so we have confusion in Minnesota now, added to the confusion created by Kavanaugh in Wisconsin and created about a week plus ago in Pennsylvania, which I think we're all up to date on. Next up, I guess, is Texas. We'll try and pick up that ball and give you a little bit more detail on what's happening after this 2-minute break that's coming up, but it's not even all that complicated. I think we actually probably covered enough of it in the beginning of the show. Essentially, Texas Republicans disputing the idea that there was any allowable way to cast a valid vote other than standing in line on Election Day, going into the polling places and using the machines there, and then handing it out in the car somehow invalidates it. I'm not certain why, but why Texas Republicans suddenly hate cars, but I guess it happened. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. Let's make sure we have caught up with everybody's comments here and other suggestions for other stories. Yes, right. Mike Musson noting we already know that Kavanaugh doesn't place much stock in consent. So, true, he's not going to recognize a consent decree there. I get where you're going with that. And some wild happenings in mobster world in Moscow. Interesting that Greg sends along. We'll hold that for another day. Mad Hatter, Elrond, noting for us with regard to the Texas case, which I guess we could, I think we've pretty well summarized where we stand with all of that, but pointing out that, yes, the Speaker of the Texas State House, Strauss, and other Republican election officials and an election lawyer, Ben Ginsburg, apparently together filed amicus briefs opposing the the drive-through voting suit. So pretty interesting in that respect too. And I've noticed a lot of conservative commentators insisting that the Texas case will likely go nowhere, precisely because the Supreme Court in Texas has refused to take up the case and has rejected it outright with a no opinion rejection of the claim there. They really have no grounds at all to be filing this suit, and it'll be astonishing but not totally out of the ballpark at this point for the federal judiciary to simply say, as they did here in Minnesota, we're going to kind of ignore what's going on among the state officials here and step in from the federal level and say that there's a federal problem with your conducting this election the way you see fit in your state, even though that's kind of what the Constitution says ought to be happening. But we read it differently. I will add to the pile for your reading the Slate piece from Mark Joseph Stern, who's been doing a great job following all of these different elections cases. He reaches pretty much the same conclusion that I did in the Minnesota cases, but he puts it this way under this headline: judges are already testing how far Amy Coney Barrett will go for Republicans. Interesting approach on this, and this is true. Essentially, betting, they have nothing to do but bet the farm here. It's not a huge, it's not a tough decision for them to decide on whether or not to take this gamble. They have no other hope of cobbling together something that's supposed to look to the world community like a victory other than to do this. But I guess the implication here is, can the Eighth Circuit impose this decision on Minnesota and get 5 justices on the Supreme Court to do what they need to do to let it either stand in place or to actually affirmatively uphold the decision? They'll take either one. But as he puts it here in his subheader, in a shocking opinion, 2 judges tried to hijack Minnesota's election law to throw out mail ballots. And, I think really what will interest you is following up on that headline. There's good detail in here about the parties and the judges. He's got the names here for you, too. By a 2-1 vote, a panel of judges for the 8th Circuit reversed U.S. District Court Judge Nancy Brassel, B-R-A-S-E-L. Don't know if I'm mispronouncing the name, but I will point out to you that on October 11th, Judge Brassel, who is a Trump appointee, threw out this stupid lawsuit that sought to invalidate all of the mail-in ballots that come in during the grace period, finding, you'll never guess what, that both plaintiffs, the two electoral, what would we say, putative electors here, lacked standing to bring the case in the first place. What do you know? She actually got that one right. Well, anyway, as she wrote, their sheer displeasure at the prospect of Trump losing Minnesota because of late arriving ballots, not enough to confer standing. But by a 2-1 vote, the judges of the 8th Circuit reversed Trump appointee Nancy Brassel. The majority consisted of Bobby Shepard, a George W. Bush nominee, and L. Stephen Graz, it's G-R-A-S-Z, and as he notes here, a notoriously unqualified Trump nominee. And we mean that literally, actually rated not qualified by the American Bar Association. Jane Kelly, Barack Obama's lone nominee to the 8th Circuit Court, dissented. Shepard and Graz blew past the standing problem, holding that the plaintiffs would suffer, quote, a concrete and particularized injury if late arriving ballots were counted because they would create an inaccurate vote tally. Shepard and Graz then ruled that the Secretary of State likely exceeded his powers under state law and infringed on the legislature's constitutional rights by changing the deadline. They directed the state to segregate ballots that arrive after November 3rd and strongly implied that they will soon declare these invalid and order them removed from vote totals. So that's pretty startling, to say the very least. Some good analysis following from there, but perhaps you'll want to dig into it on your own. And like I said, the only question now remaining, how shameless are the conservative justices on the Supreme Court, including Amy Coney Barrett? Will they take this up and simply say, the outcome is a win for us, so that's the law? We'll have to find out. Wait and see, everybody. All right, let's see. Other things that need to be shared. There are too many, of course. I guess I want to at least make mention, even if I don't dive into the story at this point, of what was happening in Philadelphia over the end of the week, last week, and into the weekend. Protests going on. Yet another crazy police shooting of a black man. This time they killed Walter Wallace Jr. And in the wake of the protests against his killing, more unrest in Philadelphia, more clashes, many apparently instituted by the police, as people like to, and I think accurately sometimes, call these things a police riot. Essentially, opportunity for the police to go wild on protesters and use the cover of their shields and blue uniforms to justify doing basically whatever they feel like doing in these situations. And some very disturbing video produced from the end of last week, apparently a confrontation, I guess police initiated confrontation between police and protesters on one of the local streets, and an SUV with a woman and her 2-year-old son and teenage nephew in the car turned down the street. The police said, no, street's closed because of this protest. Turn around and get out of here. And she did. She turned around. But in the process of turning around, for some reason, the cops with all their riot gear just swarm this SUV and actually take their clubs and bash in the windows of this car and drag everybody out. And then the topper was they pull this 2-year-old kid out as well. And then somebody takes a picture of it, and the union, the Fraternal Order of Police, posts this picture and concoct this crazy story about how the child was supposedly found wandering lost and barefoot on the streets during the violence, but Philadelphia's finest rescued the child and brought him to safety. This was somebody that they smashed the car windows in and yanked him out of his car seat, and then make up this crazy story. The Washington Post summarized it for those of us not living in Philadelphia. I would recommend, I'm sure there's fantastic on-the-spot reporting in the Philadelphia papers about it. I just happened to have this one come across the desk. It's pretty point blank in the headline. Police took a black toddler from his family's SUV. Then the union used his photo as propaganda, attorneys say. Katie Shepard reporting this one. I'll just give you that top paragraph to show you. Hey, I'm not making it up. It happened, and it was reported this way. On Thursday, the nation's largest police union posted a photo to social media taken during the unrest in Philadelphia this week, where hundreds of protesters clashed with officers over the police killing of Walter Wallace Jr. The Fraternal Order of Police's posts showed a Philadelphia police officer holding a black toddler clinging to her neck. Quote, "This child was lost during the violent riots in Philadelphia, wandering around barefoot in an area that was experiencing complete lawlessness," because the cops were there. The union claimed in a tweet and Facebook post that have since been deleted, the only thing this Philadelphia police officer cared about in that moment was protecting this child. But lawyers for the boy's family say the story was a total fabrication. In fact, they say police yanked the boy from the back seat of an SUV after busting all the windows and violently arresting and injuring his mother, who was later released without charges. So, I don't know what to tell you about that one. I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, lost in the noise of so many similar stories, but I wanted to make mention of it, even though it's not dominating the headlines at the moment, because so many other crazy things are happening. So, speaking of all the other crazy things that are happening, let's see. I mean, Mark Joseph Stern, again, commenting on the Texas case, just to give you a rundown of where he is headline-wise on that one. I think this was in the middle of the pack here, and the number's gone up here. Texas Republicans ask federal judge to throw out 117,000 legally cast ballots. Again, you're up to speed on it, but I'll include this in the roundup for you if you want to read the details as Mark lays them out. Very helpful, I think, for getting up to speed on that. Other stories. Whew. In terms of things that Republicans are preparing for in the wake of Election Day. Let's see, another Washington Post story to share with you here. Let me open this one up. We're getting down to the more granular level here. Republicans shift from challenging rules, like the ones in these 3 states that we mentioned, to preparing to challenge individual ballots. You knew this was eventually going to come down to this. Rosalind Helderman, Emma Brown, Beth Reinhard on the byline for this in Nevada, where this is happening. The Trump campaign filed a lawsuit this week seeking images of the signatures of every registered voter in Democratic-leaning Clark County, a potential first step toward challenging individual votes on grounds that the signed ballots didn't match the signatures on file. Super subjective way of doing things, of course, and, I guess they figure their best chance at knocking enough votes out of the tally, they hope, to change the outcome in the Electoral College for Nevada. In Texas, Republican office holders and candidates sued this week to have more than 100,000 votes invalidated in the Houston area. You know all about that. And then, of course, Minnesota and Pennsylvania, where election officials will set aside any mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day, even if they were mailed before the polls closed, to facilitate potential court challenges. For months, Republicans have pushed largely unsuccessfully to limit new avenues for voting in the midst of the pandemic. But with next week's elections rapidly approaching, and of course now they are this week's elections, that's how rapid the approach was, they have shifted their legal strategy in recent days to focus on tactics aimed at challenging ballots one by one, in some cases seeking to discard votes already cast during a swell of early voting. It's not just the rules anymore, said Myrna Perez, director of the Voting Rights and Elections Program at the nonpartisan Brennan Center for Justice. It's individual voters. Republicans said they're just trying to make sure the process runs smoothly. Of course. And the rules are applied fairly, arguing that Democrats have loosened election rules in ways that could confuse voters and invite fraud. We have volunteers, attorneys, and staff in place to ensure that election officials are following the law and counting every lawful ballot, Justin Reimer, chief counsel for the Republican National Committee, said on Friday. More about those watchers later on, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about them later this week. We'll try and warn you ahead of time before we run out of time here today. If elections officials aren't providing transparency and the law demands, the transparency the law demands, or we are unable to resolve disputes over certain ballots or procedures, then we will litigate as necessary. But Democrats said there's no evidence that expanded mail balloting and other pandemic-related changes lead to fraud. They accused Republicans of targeting valid votes in Democratic strongholds in a blatant bid to gain an electoral advantage. Now, that happens to actually be what's going on, but the newspaper has to say, Democrats say this, blah, blah, blah. But, people who like voting say there's some voting going on here, and Republicans are the only ones trying to get rid of people's votes. That's the bottom line, but newspapers, they can't say that. The other side has given every indication that they will challenge every ballot they can at every step of the process, said Chad Dunn, general counsel for the Texas Democratic Party and co-founder of the UCLA Voting Rights Project. The mask is off, and we're not talking about coronavirus masks, but those masks are off too. This isn't about rooting out any mythical voter fraud. It never was, Dunn said. This is about raw power and obtaining power by any means necessary. The shift in strategy comes after Republicans largely failed to limit expanded access to absentee balloting aimed at ensuring people could vote safely during the pandemic, although I don't know that that's an accurate statement anymore. That's true about the shift of strategy, of course. I don't know if it's a largely failed effort to limit expanded access anymore. They're limiting access after the fact, and that's been successful for them. In late September, a Washington Post review of 90 state and federal voting lawsuits found that judges had been broadly skeptical of GOP claims that the possibility of voter fraud required limits on mail balloting, but they are finding appeals courts to intervene, I guess. More than 85 million people have already voted, many using mail-in ballots, but President Trump has spent months trying to undermine confidence in mail ballots, and polls have consistently shown that more Republicans plan to vote in person on Election Day, while many Democrats have chosen to vote absentee. That means Republicans stand to gain a significant advantage if they can successfully challenge absentee votes already cast. Trump has telegraphed for months that if the election is close and he's running ahead of former Vice President Joe Biden on election night, he will urge states to stop counting absentee ballots even if they have been correctly cast. And you've heard him say the stupid things like, it would be very, very proper and very nice, so eloquent, if a winner were declared on November 3rd instead of counting ballots for 2 weeks, which is totally inappropriate, and I don't believe that that's by our laws, Trump told reporters at a White House, at the White House earlier this week. Trump also has bluntly stated that he believes the more people vote, the less likely Republicans will prevail, a perspective that appears to have emboldened the GOP embrace invalidating votes as a political strategy. Criticizing a proposal by congressional Democrats to encourage absentee voting, Trump said in March, they had levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again, which would be terrific, of course. Speaking to donors at a closed-door fundraiser in Nashville last week, Trump said his campaign would have his own team and law enforcement watching polling places, and that the campaign would probably have to challenge individual ballots. My biggest risk of losing is probably fraud, he said, according to one person in the room who spoke on condition of anonymity. A senior Trump campaign official said they are most closely watching Nevada's Clark County, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee, all Democratic strongholds in swing states, as well as the entire state of North Carolina. The campaign has 8,500 lawyers prepared to help, as well as local lawyers lined up around the country, he said, adding, "We are prepared to sue if we need to." RNC spokesman Mike Reed denied Democratic claims that the party is trying to discourage voters, noting that the GOP has run an expansive get-out-the-vote program. Though last-minute rules changes championed by Democrats invite fraud and post-election confusion, he said, "We want every vote that is legally eligible to be cast and counted safely and securely." In Texas, 2 Republican candidates and a member of the Texas House asked the state Supreme Court this week to invalidate more than 100,000 ballots that have already been cast at drive-through centers in Harris County, contending that the creation of the drive-through sites was illegal and thus ballots at them should be thrown out. The court threw out a previous challenge to the drive-through centers. Polls show an unusually close race in the Republican-leaning state where voters have flocked to vote early in record numbers. Pennsylvania and Minnesota, you know what's going on there. Let's see. That we won't have to recap. In a statement, Trump senior counsel Justin Clark called the situation in Pennsylvania a big victory. Trump spokeswoman Taya McDonald called the Minnesota opinion a major victory for voting rights and the rule of law. One of the tactics that most concerns Democrats is an apparent campaign to have votes rejected on technical grounds, such as when voter signatures on ballots do not match signatures on file with elections officials. More than 30 states and districts require signature matching for absentee ballots, though voting rights advocates have long argued this is an inexact science that leads to the rejection of valid ballots. In some states, such as Pennsylvania and Michigan, election laws explicitly allow third parties to challenge individual mail-in ballots. Even where the law is less clear, there are signs that Republicans may ask courts to intervene to permit them to contest ballots. In Florida, where concerns about the signature matching process in 2018 led state lawmakers to require formal signature training for elections officials, an attorney acting for the Trump campaign last month sought permission to observe the signature matching process in Broward County, the state's Democratic stronghold. Broward County Democratic Party Chairwoman Cynthia Bush said she was concerned that the request was aimed at laying the groundwork for potential litigation. Well, it is. She's right. This is a way to try to scare people, make people mistrust the outcome, and take potential legal action to get ballots thrown out, she said. The appointed Republican election supervisor denied the request, saying the review could slow the count. But earlier this month, both campaigns were given a one-time chance to watch the process play out for a handful of ballots. Neither the lawyer nor a spokesman for the Trump campaign responded to requests for comment. They won't accept that, and that'll become litigation later. In Nevada, a lawsuit filed this week in Clark County, which includes Las Vegas, also appears to be aimed at laying the groundwork for challenging signatures. That suit asks a judge to force the county to release a massive trove of detailed information, including the names, party affiliations, and work schedules of election workers responsible for counting ballots. A copy of every signature that appeared on mail ballots returned to elections officials, and a copy of every signature on file used to authenticate ballots. A hearing will be held today, Monday. By the way, I think emergency hearing on the Texas case in federal court in Texas also scheduled for today. This is the one that the Texas Supreme Court said is baseless, and the state, the Speaker of the House in the Texas state legislature, a Republican, likewise says is baseless and has filed an amicus brief in. The suit, this one in Nevada, the second of the week by the Trump campaign targeting the county. The other case, filed on October 23rd, argues that the county has prevented poll watchers from adequately observing ballot processing operations. Trump campaign lawyers argued in court that the limitations could allow fraud to go undetected, including by election workers tempted to assist their favorite candidate. That's an interesting accusation. Nevada is one of several states with Democratic legislatures that dramatically expanded mail-in voting. The Trump campaign sued unsuccessfully to block the state's decision to distribute ballots to every registered voter. Nearly 1.8 million were mailed out, and as of Thursday, more than 500,000 had been returned. A Washington Post average of polls shows Biden leading Trump by 4 percentage points in the state. On Friday, an RNC official said on a call with reporters that the GOP had requested similar information in other places, but declined to say where. He noted that Democrats have made such requests in Arizona. Democrats sued officials in Maricopa County for information about rejected ballots, hoping to find the voters to help their ballots get accepted. A judge denied the request. Not exactly the same kind of lawsuit, as you might have figured out by now. The official said Clark County was a particular concern for Republicans because the county has lowered the standard, he says, for matching signatures, making it easier for ballots to be accepted there than in more Republican parts of the state. But Greg Zunino, a lawyer with the Nevada Attorney General's office who represents the Secretary of State, defended the county's balloting process. He said at a hearing this week that he believes the lawsuit is an effort by the Trump campaign just to reduce the number of votes counted in a blue part of the state. Pretty easy to see it happening. Now, I've got another article here somewhere that I wanted to grab, but I might be running out of time to actually find it. But I'll find it for you for the summary. But while I'm scrolling and looking elsewhere, I did also see requests being reportedly coming into state elections officials from a private, or from a personal email account with like a Gmail domain, purporting to have come from Trump campaign officials, asking state officials to report to them at this Gmail address very, very detailed information about where and in like what rooms in the offices of the state elections boards the ballots will be stored during the tallying process, which apparently raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of questions from a lot of people. And there's really no good reason to have that information. And apparently they didn't respond to it yet, which is a good idea. But another hair-raising and eyebrow-raising possibility out there. Also, of note, let's see, and this one I think I'll have to find in my tweet stream, but I noticed that our good friend Arch Pundit pointing out, making a good point, that you should be keeping an eye on the self-appointed poll watchers for the Trump campaign this time around. That there's a very specific process. Here, I found the tweet here. Arch Pundit commenting on a McKay Coppins tweet and story. McKay writing, pro-Trump poll watchers are set to fan out across battleground states in the coming days, smartphones in hand, to hunt for evidence of voter fraud. Brace for a blizzard of misleading, out-of-context videos. His final pre-election story, filed in The Atlantic, herein. The Trump campaign's chaotic closing strategy is the title. You should take a look. But I think more to the point, Arch Pundit pointing out here, this is true. There are specific laws requiring poll watchers in most states that they be registered to a specific campaign or party. And many people seem likely to be engaging in illegal conduct by just showing up and saying, well, I'm watching the polls because I like President Trump and I have a smartphone. And I think they're going to claim the right to do that. And in many places, well, sometimes they'll be handled with kid gloves, to be sure. But in many places, they might actually face expulsion or even arrest by the authorities for insisting that because they love Trump and have a smartphone, they should be allowed to get in the face of voters and film their faces while they're online, or film over their shoulders, perhaps, while they fill out their ballots, all in the name of this. I'm trying to catch fraud, and the police won't stand for it in some places. In some places, they'll probably encourage it. And they'll come and arrest them, and that will lead them to probably flood the airwaves and social media tomorrow and for days to come with complaints that they have been illegally suppressed in their rights to make sure, to patrol the votes, to make sure that there isn't any fraud going on. And of course, the fraud will be their fraud in insisting that they are somehow legally entitled to monitor the activity of voters casting their secret ballots, which they're not. but you can be sure that many hundreds, many thousands of James O'Keefe acolytes and wannabes will flood Twitter with videos of them being illegally suppressed from watching to make sure that all votes are legally cast. You may remember that in 2016, James O'Keefe spent the day tailing buses and shuttle buses around various cities in the United States, insisting that they were packed full of illegal voters that they were bringing from one polling place to another to cast illegal ballots. And all it was it's video of a bus, and we don't even know if there was anybody in it. We're going to have lots of that going on, I think. I think Arch Pundit is exactly right here, and McKay only goes part way, I think, in bringing that story home. You can read it for yourself, and you can, of course, stay tuned, as you should, every day for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam. So many stories that we weren't able to get to today, so many angles on the stories we did get to that we weren't able to get to. He'll have a fresh new show for you and bring you all the information that we might have skipped in our poor efforts here
From
today.
networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Let's see. Oh, you know what? Here's one that I didn't get to bring up, and I don't know whether it's on this agenda or not. A third rally in which Trump voters were stranded by shuttle buses that did not return to pick them up. I was wondering whether this was going to keep happening, and I guess if you're wondering whether they're ever going to wake up, read the news, and realize they've been suckered, yeah, the answer's still no. See you tomorrow.